Every winter, the global elite gather at the World Economic Forum's conference in Davos, Switzerland, where they plan the problems they will create for us and the solutions they will so generously provide. But did you know that they have a second annual conference? It's called the Annual Meeting of the New Champions. It happens every summer, hence why it's often referred to as the Summer Davos. Now, if you didn't know this, you're not alone. It seems there was next to no coverage of this year's Summer Davos conference, which is why we decided to break down its most important bits in today's video. Stay tuned. Let's start with a quick bit of background. As most of you will know, the World Economic Forum, or WEF, is an unaccountable and unelected international organisation consisting of the world's most powerful individuals and institutions. As a result, it has basically become more powerful than most governments. As mentioned earlier, these elites meet every year in Davos, Switzerland, to discuss the future of the world without our input. And this is not a conspiracy theory. The WEF has clearly stated agendas on its website and has been coordinating its so-called stakeholders to ensure these agendas are implemented everywhere. Many of these agendas are arguably anti-human, as they result in a combination of most humans being replaced by machines and most of the remaining humans living highly controlled lives. In the words of the WEF, we will own nothing and be happy, while its members will own everything and be even happier. I don't recall voting for these agendas to be implemented, do you? Well, believe it or not, it's possible that we voted for them without knowing. This is because in recent years, the WEF has been, quote, penetrating governments around the world, in the words of its founder and outgoing chairman, Klaus Schwab. Yes, Klaus literally said this on stage while discussing the governments of Canada and Argentina. Put simply, the WEF has been working behind the scenes to put people in positions of political power around the world that will ensure their agendas are implemented without obstruction. This is why supposedly opposing presidential candidates in any given election coincidentally have profiles on the WEF's website. Now, if you watched our video about how to survive the Great Reset, the WEF's most infamous agenda, then you'll know about its global shapers who implement its agendas in cities and its young global leaders who implement its agendas in countries. You'll notice that both focus on influencing young people, and this is not a coincidence either. A few years ago, Klaus made an explicit goal of indoctrinating as many young people as possible about the WEF's agenda. A recent Wall Street Journal exposition alleged that he even went as far as firing dozens of people from the organisation because they were too old. A little hypocritical, given that Klaus himself is over 80, but I suppose hypocrisy can be found in every totalitarian ideology. And, like every ideology, you need to find a way to root out the grifters from the true believers, the ones who slavishly adhere to the WEF's agendas. The New Champions track is one of many paths that lead to becoming a high priest of the WEF. Its website specifies that new champions are C-suite executives from medium-sized businesses around the world, interested in delivering the WEF's dystopia. Naturally, these new champions are carefully picked. And every summer, the new champions who made the cut gather in a growing city, typically in China, to show the upper echelons of the WEF just how dedicated they are to its de facto religion. This year's conference took place in Dalian, China, and its theme was the, quote, next frontiers for growth. But before we dig in, be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ping that notification bell, and consider sharing this video with someone you think needs to see it. Apologies for the interruption, folks, but if you're looking to get the very best information about altcoins and become part of the most welcoming community in crypto, then we have just the place for you. The Coin Bureau Club is where you can find our unrivaled altcoin reviews. Every week we cover a different low-cap altcoin project, and these reviews are the best in the business. No one digs as deep as we do into these projects, and we share all the info we find with our members. There's tons more besides our reviews though. You'll also get access to our exclusive research feed where I and other key Coin Bureau team members share alpha, our thoughts on the market, and more in real time. You'll get to see what we all hold in our portfolios, and there's an exclusive members Discord as well. This is the place where you can chat directly with us, ask questions, and meet fellow crypto enthusiasts. The community there is the best you will find in the crypto space. Everyone is welcome, and you can talk crypto 24/7 if you so desire. There are loads of other benefits to being a Coin Bureau Club member too, so if you're interested, check out the link in the description below. And now, back to the video. Now, the annual meeting of the new champions began as all WEF conferences do, and that was with an opening speech by the one and only Klaus Schwab. He highlighted the fact that the WEF remains committed to the Fourth Industrial Revolution and underscored its commitment to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. If you watched our recent video about universal basic income, you'll know that the Fourth Industrial Revolution consists of a combination of technologies, such as AI and robotics, which could, keyword there, could, replace humans in most jobs. In case it wasn't clear enough, the WEF really wants this to happen, for many reasons. One of these is the fact that implementing a digital technocracy is one of the explicit purposes of the SDGs, which mandate the creation of digital IDs, the rollout of smart cities, and the implementation of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, in every country by 2030. Also, not a conspiracy theory. You can learn more about the UN using the link in the description. Anyways, after Klaus was done, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang spoke, which was not that surprising given that the conference was being held in China. What was surprising, however, was the subsequent speech by Andrzej Duda, the president of Poland. Andrzej revealed that he's been eagerly attending WEF events for years, and he then proceeded to essentially shill Poland as the ideal place for China to do business in Europe, promising low taxes, a youthful, hard-working labour force, and easy access to the wider European market. This was very surprising, as Andrzej has been publicly aligning Poland with the US and its allies. Behind somewhat closed doors, however, he is itching to align with China and its allies, which is crazy considering that one of these allies is Russia. We suspect this is because Germany's economic implosion presents an economic opportunity for Poland, and Poland doesn't exactly like Germany very much either. World War II, etc. In any case, Andrzej's speech is evidence of something we noted in our video about the BRICS, and that's that many European countries could align with the BRICS when they realise that they have all the resources and that resources are required for economies to function and societies to remain stable. It seems Western Europe is learning this lesson the hard way, but well, that's a topic for another time. Now this ties into another talk at this year's Summer Davos, titled, quote, "Where is globalisation headed?" If you watched our video about financial nihilism, you'll know that globalisation effectively involves outsourcing labour to where it's cheapest in order to maximise profits for a small group of global elites. This is something Columbia University professor Adam Tooze didn't hesitate to point out in his talk. He began by making it clear that the WEF is ground zero for globalisation and that all the people in the room were part of the globalist elite. Seriously, check out the talk, you can find it on YouTube. Incredibly, Adam admits that globalisation has been squeezing the lower class and middle class in most parts of the world, while inflating the upper class to unprecedented financial and ideological highs. He also pointed out that globalisation started falling apart in 2008, which we've also noticed. Of course, Adam doesn't think that globalisation is a problem per se. Rather, he thinks it's just a problem because the US is resisting the fact that China is becoming the new centre of gravity for globalisation. From Adam's perspective, this is why there's so much geopolitical turmoil, and he's probably right. What's scary is that Adam predicts that the US and its allies will try and onshore their manufacturing, but will eventually fail, forcing them to buy from China in the end. He believes that the first countries to recognise that reshoring is futile and team up with China will be the first to reap the associated rewards. Well, that explains Poland. Now, obviously, Adam seemed to be a bit biased towards China in his analysis. This was made clear when he said something along the lines of India not having a chance at becoming the next nexus for globalisation. For context, it seems that the US and its allies have been trying to convince India to challenge China. Regardless, Adam wrapped up his talk by making a series of similarly spooky recommendations and predictions. One of these was the recommendation that the EU expands the euro's dominance as much as it can during the next financial crisis, which he predicts will happen sometime later this year. He also recommends that the US and EU should practically give up on manufacturing and turn their focus towards taking care of their aging populations and increasing their quality of life using cheap goods from China. He predicts that Europe will become a, quote, front line between the rich and the poor. What could possibly go wrong? Now, this relates to another interesting panel at the annual meeting of the New Champions about the fragmentation of the global financial system. For reference, the unprecedented sanctions against Russia by the US and its allies have put a black mark on the entire so-called Global South due to its relationship with Russia. The practical effect of this is that investors and businesses in the so-called Global North have become very hesitant to invest in or expand their operations to countries like China. CraneShares CEO Jonathan Crane revealed this during his part of the panel discussion and said it will take years to reverse this new trend. And yes, the moderator did ask the question you're probably asking. Is the yuan going to compete against the US dollar because of this financial fragmentation? What's fascinating is that the panelists weren't sure, despite most of them being pro-China. What's even more fascinating is the reason why. Kung Sheng Fan, the head of a Hong Kong asset management firm, revealed that the biggest barrier to the yuan competing with the US dollar is not that the domestic currency is controlled, but because the Chinese bond market isn't deep or liquid enough. This requires a bit of an explanation, so bear with me. Wealthy individuals and large institutions, including governments, don't typically save their money in regular checking accounts like we do. Instead, they buy bonds, aka debt, specifically US government debt. This is because it is considered to be the safest asset you can buy, and you can earn a nice yield on it. More importantly, because the market for US government debt is so big, it makes it very easy to buy and sell large amounts of it without moving the price. This kind of liquidity is necessary if you're moving tens or hundreds of billions of dollars around, and the US bond market is the only one with this liquidity. On that note, Bonnie Chan, the head of Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing, had noted in a previous panel that Chinese citizens have over $30 trillion of savings sitting idle. It's believed that these savings are idle because Chinese real estate has imploded and Chinese stocks are uncertain. Never mind that the Chinese economy isn't exactly in the best shape either. Whatever the case though, this cash pile drives home the significance of Jonathan's prediction that Chinese citizens will eventually start investing in stocks the same way that Americans do. That means putting all their savings into stocks along with a portion of their paychecks, causing the markets to go up only. If this sounds familiar, that's because it's almost exactly what BlackRock's CEO Larry Fink said in this year's letter to investors, which we also summarized. If you watched that video, you'll know that Larry has been trying to convince countries with high savings rates, such as India, to force their citizens to invest in stocks. Now, given BlackRock's close relationship with the WEF, it's safe to assume that it's putting similar pressure on China. But it seems that BlackRock is realizing what all control freaks will come to realize. You can force people to adopt dystopian technologies like CBDCs, but you can't force them to actually use them. Speaking of which, at the end of the panel, there was a somewhat funny question from a Chinese member of the audience. He asked Jonathan why Americans are so unhappy if they're all invested in stocks and stocks are going up only. Jonathan shrugged his shoulders and said, I don't know, inflation. It just goes to show how out of touch these globalist elites are. Moving on. Now, the next panel discussion worth dissecting at this year's Summer Davos pertained to another pressing topic, and that's the increasingly tense relationship between the US and China. As you can imagine, this exchange was pretty intense and opinions varied from one extreme to the other. For example, foreign relations specialist Robin Niblett said flat out that we're in the early stages of another Cold War and that there's no way to backpedal as we're dealing with a zero-sum game. In plain English, it's either going to be the US or China that takes power. A world with two powers isn't possible. Similarly, Lin Kuok from the Brookings Institution think tank warned that China's intimidation of the Filipino Navy in the South China Sea could result in an accident that causes an actual conflict. In turn, the US would be forced to step in to defend the Philippines to honour a military treaty it signed in the 1950s. Meanwhile, Hong Kong political science professor Li Cheng reminded the pro-American panelists of a famous saying from former US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, quote, "To be an enemy of the US is dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal." The audience erupted in laughter, and Li then said something chilling. He noted that most of the people in the audience laughing were from Europe, which should make the meaning of the quote evident. If not, let me spell it out for you. US allies often find themselves in proxy wars where they suffer the social and economic consequences while the US reaps the benefits, if any. This is arguably what's been happening in Europe with Ukraine, and evidence for it can be found in a forgotten statement by Lord Ismay, the first Secretary-General of NATO. The purpose of NATO is, quote, "to keep the Americans in Europe, the Russians out, and the Germans down." Make of that what you will. And yes, it is a real quote. You can find it on NATO's official website. All sources in the description, folks. Anyhow, back to the US-China relationship. By the end of the panel discussion on the topic, it seems that more level heads had prevailed, with the panelists calling on other countries to keep the US and China in check. By this, they meant ensuring that both superpowers continue abiding by the rule of law. If you watched our aforementioned video about the UN, you'll know that these laws are already out the window. If you've been paying attention, you've probably noticed that the US and its allies are becoming more like China and its allies as a result. Look no further than Pavel Durov's arrest for evidence of that. Now, the WEF's Summer Davos ended with some very short closing remarks from Mirek Dusek, the managing director of the WEF. Mirek looked a bit depressed, presumably because he'd previously hinted that he was a big investor in Chinese EVs, which are starting to be hit by tariffs in the EU. Mirek is Czech, by the way. Now, Mirek gave a pitiful overview of the key points of the conference, almost all of which related to ESG in some way. FYI, ESG is an investment ideology pioneered by the likes of BlackRock and directed by the WEF to ensure that there's enough private sector funding to achieve the UN's SDGs by 2030. Two Chinese government officials then took the stage and proudly announced that the WEF's next Summer Davos will take place in another Chinese city. It goes without saying that the China focus comes from the fact that the WEF wants to stay in control of the globalization its constitution created. If what this year's speakers and panelists said at Summer Davos about China's role in globalization is true, then we can expect to see more WEF conferences in China in the coming years. Klaus seems to have taken this shift as an opportunity to step slightly off stage. He will retire as chairman of the WEF in 2025. And this brings me to the big question, and that's what this means for you and your investments. Well, the answer depends on your perspective. If you believe that China is a rising power and that the BRICS will gain global dominance during the next commodity market boom, then you should prepare accordingly. That means understanding how your quality of life and investments could be affected. In practical terms, this means asking yourself where your country stands in the changing geopolitical order. Is it allied with the declining West, the rising East, or somewhere in the middle? How will it respond if China rises? Fortunately for any Poles watching, Andrzej Duda has made it clear that Poland is trying to cozy up to China, for better or for worse. It's possible that the rest of Eastern Europe will follow suit, as they're also not the biggest fans of the German interests that rule over the EU. This historical fact is easy to forget. Conversely, if you believe that China isn't the rising power it's been made out to be, and that there won't be any commodity boom to boost the BRICS, then all you need to do is continue living and investing with the status quo. If you think about it, this is the easier option, which is probably why so many believe it. As with all things though, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, and the geopolitical uncertainty we're experiencing seems to be evidence of this middle scenario playing out. It seems that nobody truly knows for sure if China is a rising power, nor how this could affect the US and its allies. What this means for us, then, is that we need to be as informed as possible about what's going on in the world and do our best not to fall for the propaganda that's being spewed from both sides. This is becoming harder to do as censorship efforts increase across the board, but it is still just about possible. For now. And that is all for today's video. So if you found it informative, smash that like button to let us know. If you want to stay informed, subscribe to the channel and ping that notification bell. And if you want to help inform others about what's been going on at the WEF, then be sure to share this video with those who will watch it. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Guy, signing off.